Yes, before I ask John to make his presentation, I'd just like to point out that we did respond to the questions that the commission had asked in their letter of, I'm sure, was that October 30th? But a letter to you, Mr. Ayala, was dated yesterday, in fact, and responding to those questions. And then later on, if there's time, I'll ask Keith to expand on some of the responses to those questions. With that, I'll call John.
Thank you, Chairman Ayala, Commissioners. I welcome this opportunity to maybe clarify the intent of the original water use and development plan, which we worked on, and answer any questions. And hopefully, we can make sure that the numbers and things that were used are correct. My name is John Nishimura. I'm with Fukunaga and Associates, and we did participate with the Planning Department and the Department of Water Supply and Milton way back when the first update to the Water Use and Development Plan was prepared. So what I'd like to do is start off with just some background for those of you not familiar with the Water Use and Development Plan. But the original plan was prepared back in 1990. And it was not updated formally until we began doing it in 2004. So there was a big gap from the original to the first update. The final draft plan was completed in 2010 and was adopted officially by county ordinance in February 2011. And then after a series of public hearings and meetings, was adopted or accepted by the Water Commission in November of 2011.
Sorry, just a quick, just
Sure.
for me, I'm only on the commission for about 2 years, so maybe Bill or someone else, can you go back to that slide? Yeah, so accepted by CWERM, does that plan come through the commission itself or accepted by our staff?
No, it comes to commission votes on. It's required by law.
Yeah, staff, so staff, we accompanied staff on the presentations and public hearings actually. And then, it came to the commission for decision-making and acceptance. So that November date is actually the official signing or approval of the plan and adoption into the bigger Hawaii water plan. I'll go straight into the recommendations and some of the findings. The purpose of the plan, again, since it started, there was a void between 1990 and 2004-5 timeframe. We wanted to conduct this island-wide assessment. So that's very important to hear because we wanted to look at the entire island, primarily to start prioritizing sensitive and non-sensitive areas. So one of the goals was to identify these sensitive and non-sensitive areas. And what came out of that was the primary focus on the most sensitive areas were the Hualalai Aquifer sector, and of which the Keauhou Aquifer system is part of, and the West Mauna Kea Aquifer sector, which is the Waimea Aquifer system. So those two areas are right now in our court to evaluate. So we have just gotten started on this, so keep that in mind because we're starting to get into it now with numbers.
Real quick question, why were they deemed sensitive?
Yeah, I think I can get to that. Okay. So as a result of the public, but basically it came down to the planning policies versus sustainable yield. Okay. So these are, after going through public informational meeting questions and discussions, we've adopted these 3 guiding principles, probably not unlike what the commission is doing. Water is a most precious resource and shall be used wisely. Conserve and don't waste it. And the next one, highest quality water shall be used for the community's highest beneficial uses. And then adoption of a lower quality water, reuse water, surface water, brackish water, should be used whenever possible. Okay, and just to frame where the water use and development plans are, it's fed by the other four components. Water Resource Protection Plan, of which the Commission is in charge of, the Water Quality Plan, Department of Health, State Water Projects Plan to assess the state needs throughout the, for state projects throughout the state, and the Department of Agriculture, which is the Water Use and Development Plan. And something about the Agricultural Water Use and Development Plan, I think, is important to note. That came in as an add-on to the original four plans. So that's the fifth plan that came in, I believe, 1998, when it became a requirement or a new component of the plan. We're just kind of talking it over, and that kind of corresponds with big plantations going out and things like their water systems not being managed as actively as it used to be. So there was a big need to support agriculture, as well as from the state side to look at financial means to assist it. And that information also is filtered down into the development of the county's water use and development plan. And the county's objective is stated to set forth the allocation of water to land use through the development of policies, strategies to guide the county in its planning, management, and development of water resources to meet projected demands. Part of it, this thing on the counties getting heavily involved in looking at this was actually probably to help them with their land use policy setting. The Commission recognized that there was a need for flexibility to accommodate each county's individual needs, priorities, and specific water needs. And the plan versatility is also necessary to encourage innovation, as well as accommodate unique county-specific concerns that we could include in this water plan. Okay, so yeah, that was part of the formulation, back in the 90s. I was involved with the State Water Projects Plan very early back in the 90s, and they used to call it home rule, kind of like let the counties kind of have a big part in saying what their destiny should be and the formulation of their vision. So in our, again, this refers to the 2010 update. The assessment of land use plans and policies. The initial assessment, again, focused on the entire island. So it wasn't as detailed and specific to any one area. But it was a preliminary evaluation of land use policies and, again, identification of sensitive and less sensitive areas. And we brought up this concept of full build-out scenario. And that is very important because that's oftentimes a number that you've seen around. And Chairman, that's actually what has been used to identify some of the sensitive and non-sensitive areas. Partly because, there's a plan and a policy description of what could occur, not will occur, but could occur on certain classifications of land use. Okay, right. So that's why what we did was we used this full build-out scenario that assumed that all land area would be developed to its theoretical maximum extent. But if you go back in the documents, it's not out of, it was stated in the policy document. So we wanted to start highlighting which areas had to be looked at more carefully. And I think that's what we were trying to achieve. So these are the three primary land use policies that were considered. State land use, of course. But the state land use classification is basically there's four different classifications. Too broad to really come up with a water demand. So the next step was the county's jurisdiction, which would be the county general plan, LUPAG, Land Use Pattern Allocation Guide. And that we looked at as kind of the ultimate vision of the county on how they would like parts of their island to be developed. But again, we applied this full build-out number, which is maximum density on every square foot. And then more recently, well, actually, while we were preparing the update, the community development plan program was moving forward, and they actually adopted the KONA community development plan. And so that became in the background, but we didn't incorporate it into the 2010 document, mainly because, yeah, we had to close the window somewhere, and that happened after the window had closed. Then there was county zoning. County zoning can somewhat be considered allowable development, sort of authorized by ordinance, because that's assigned to every parcel. Okay, that's another important thing, because land ownership is another key variable in this that needs to be considered. General plan was not tied to parcel. It's more regional, so it's a big bubble of an area. But anyway, the zoning is actually applied to parcels. But as you heard from what Dwayne said, you still need to go through the process of getting it reviewed, get your permits, get your infrastructure, get your EIS, everything needs to be reviewed before you can get new zoning. And certain things, you need to go through the hoops, in other words, to get it developed. So in our model, we're looking at these static numbers. What is sustainable, a sustainable land use policy? What the ideal situation would be where your sustainable yield in million gallons per day is up here. And then the full build-out scenario would be somewhere below. And the existing zoning build-out scenario is down here. And what we're going to present would be what we have so far is the infill of the undeveloped parcels, which is part of the authorized planned use. Okay. Let me go back. The sensitive areas, typically, there were 3 aquifers out of the 13 aquifers that were identified as sensitive, or where the LUPAG theoretical maximum full build-out was higher than the sustainable yield. The rest of the island, even with full build-out, was still okay. And that's, you can imagine that we're talking about every square inch built to its maximum, like that
Okay, in terms of
was admit this sustainability rule. In fact, some of them, you can imagine the windward side, like Hilo, plenty water, and the development, even with their fairly aggressive potential LUPAG, still had enough water. So, that's why I wanted to kind of let you know that this full build-out scenario was made primarily, and if you're safe in those conditions, you're probably safe for a long time, right? And the idea was, again, knowing the county has limited resources, we want them to focus on which areas are close. Where the sensitive areas. That's why we're doing this next effort. So it's kind of an evolution of the work, and yeah, it is a lot more detailed and time-consuming to do this detailed work to get into parcels and things like that.
But John,
Yes.
just for clarification, the full build-out has nothing to do with what Mr. Kanuga was mentioning about authorized use.
Correct.
It's not authorized.
Correct.
It's just conceptual.
Right. Yeah, again, if you go back to what we were trying to do, we're trying to look at the county, state land use policies relative to water resource. And so that's one of the policies that are on the books, that the LUPAG is on the books, and the map is there. The maximum developable unit densities are there. That's maximum. So that's why we come up with a theoretical. So if you can imagine all the square, I mean, one example is like Keauhou. I mean, even with the high densities, you're gonna have areas with parks that could have been condos, right? Or streets, even streets are there. You know, other types of facilities that not gonna be built to the full density. But again, not to discount the method, but the idea was to make sure that the non-sensitive areas were identified, because that takes a lot of burden off the county to be, you know, trying to study in more detail.
And those three sensitive areas, I see two here, Keauhou, Nia,
Yeah, there's actually Anaiho Malu.
Anaiho.
Yeah, so it's basically that
That
west,
western,
yeah,
yeah.
that, in that gap over there. So, just go into briefly what our proposed, update effort is looking like. We'll be coming in with a formal project description for approval by the commission. We're working with staff on the methodology. And that will be, you know, we wanted to just brief you on what we're doing and what we're thinking of doing, so you can kind of see what's going behind it.
You're not doing that today, though, right?
No. I'll save another meeting. You guys are kind of stretched out already. Okay, so some of the refinements, you know, we're gonna include this additional planning information, yeah? We're gonna, like I said, we didn't have the Kona, Community Development Plan. There's some updates to the general plan. And then, we're gonna include this thing on what projects have already been, kind of have some agreements already made, and, you know, where that is. So, in the assessment of these recent developments, you know, one of the things we want to do, first of all, is identify from the whole island, what parts of it are already developed, because some of the lands are already technically accounted for, and they're at some kind of use level that the chances of going higher is actually remote. So we wanted to show that first. So let's see what parts of the island are already served by the water system. Again, the full build out was conceptual, like a flat, we're talking about a flat plan and just maximizing your development there. Now we're gonna cut it up and see which parcels are actually developed, how much water they're using, and go from there. And then the rest, we're gonna be focusing on the infill. So that's why focusing on the infill development and then identification of lands with authorized plans used. This is what we're using as the authorized plans used. And yeah, and then we're also looking at actual meter data, consumption data, to kind of do reality check on some of the planning numbers. You got to understand that when the planning numbers that we use typically are also used for the design of water system improvements. Okay, and if you look from the mission of water supply, their task is to provide reliable service to their customers. So inherently, some of these planning numbers are conservative. And they need to even put factor of safety, and that's the engineers, maybe we do that, because we don't want the system to fail, right? Including transmission, including source. If one pump is down, you gotta have another pump backup. You know, storage to handle peak flows during the day so that you're not pumping to react to different kinds of flows. So the planning unit rates that we use oftentimes can be used for engineering design as well as planning. But they're inherently gonna be relatively conservative. And then after we find out how they're using water now, then we're gonna do a reality check on the projections that we did originally. Okay, so this is the whole Keauhou, well, it's actually the Hualalai Aquifer, of which this is the Keauhou Aquifer system. And this is Lupag. So this is what it looks like, yeah. So, you know, some of them are residential, agriculture, got more commercial and more higher density development, of course, around Kailua. Something to think about is, and part of the reason why the sensitive areas were sensitive areas was because of this, I guess it's a light yellow color. Right, that's considered urban expansion based on Lupag, What urban expansion means is not defined as residential, not defined as commercial, but where the general plan envisioned development to occur. What kind of development is still undefined? Okay, but we used one of the theoretical maximums in there, probably 10 to 15 units per acre. What that already is probably somewhat conservative, right? Because 43,560 square feet, to have 10 units there, it's like 4,000 units per square foot units for single family. So that's almost like probably a mid-rise kind of building on all this yellow area, okay? So on top of this, we're gonna focus in on the hot spot, which would be I guess it's close to the Keauhou plan. Yeah, so this is Kailua town area. Again, you can see that it's kind of like a blob as far as the area that we're studying for the different kinds of land uses. Okay, what this shows are the pattern dots on this map shows, is supposed to be red. You guys, please forgive me if I'm color insensitive. But this is, Milton, you heard this before, right? But
It's a fancy way of saying colorblind.
no, insensitive, I can see, but I cannot, but sometimes I have trouble telling the difference. But these parcels have water connections to it. So somehow they're in the grid and they're somewhat accounted for. Although not fully developed, there's a meter there that goes to that land, okay? This blue crosshatch is what we're calling the authorized planned use. So these are areas where the county has some kind of water agreement, development agreement, water credit, or some of them are actually parcels, vacant parcels that have a lateral coming to it, but they gotta still get building permit before they can put a building on it. So, that's what this came out to. And then, yeah, this is the one with the transit TOD locations. So what you can see is, where the community plan, which went through a lot of stakeholder discussions and to formulate, identified the areas where they would like to see development, but as Dwayne said, there's a lot more things that are required before they can come to fruition. But what we understand, though, is that the community, CDP, TOD areas would tend to have somewhat of an easier time to get their developments moving than somebody that's outside of the circles. Because that's part of, again, what the community looked at in terms of what they wanted. Yeah, so this is just backing out so you can see what area we were focusing in on. Okay, showed this chart the last time we saw you, but I think only had about a couple minutes to present it. But this is basically the authorized plan use. This between here. I should start from the bottom. This is the existing use based on, and I just talked to Paul over here, and he said kind of collaborated. That's near the same number of the pumpage that they're coming out with, and this is with the authorized plan use that we've compiled from planning and water departments on how much more is committed. But that doesn't mean committed means is going to develop instantly. As you heard, it'll probably be something more like this. And at some point, when you approach this and you're outside of those authorized plan use areas, I mean, you would have to get in line and make sure you comply with all the requirements to elevate that authorized plan use to a higher level.
John, that's authorized plan use, but all with commitments.
Yeah, that's what I understand, yes. That's the tabulation that we've been putting together, Kurt helped with that, and we got some from planning. So that's the numbers that we've been putting together. Again, we still work in progress, but this is what we coming out with right now. Yeah, and then, of course, sustainable yield up at 38. Okay.
Explain your different growth rates.
Oh, okay. Yeah. this growth rate, and there was a question that came to the department about, how to project into 40 years. But we're just going by the framework, and the framework requires 20-year projection. And typically, we would have liked to attach it to the general plan growth rate. But in this particular case, I think the general plan went up to 2020. The current one, something like that, 2020. So what we did was more or less use, kind of continue on that growth rate, using a high, medium, and low projection. And, we understand, and it's in the letter, that there is I think a DBEDT projection for the whole island, but, obviously different parts of the island have different kinds of growth rates. So we would prefer to wait for the county to come up with the actual growth rate for this region. And they're in the process of getting that started. I think in the letter it'll say beginning in 2015, the county planning department will be updating their growth projections. So again, work in progress, but this is kind of what it looks like. Just a quick summary, this is the end already. The 2010, we feel that the 2010 Water Use and Development Plan did serve its purpose, maybe more so than we expected, but it identified the sensitive and less sensitive areas. A lot of attention, obviously, on the sensitive areas. And, this is part of the reason. So you can see where we're coming from, but we also identified non-sensitive areas. So those would be not ignored, but monitored, kind of on the back burner. But most of the spotlight is going to be on the sensitive areas. Much of the area, this particular study area, is already served by the department. And that's where got to be a little bit careful, because we don't want to double count. I mean, that would be the obvious thing that happens if you go with a full build-out scenario and you say, oh, we're using this much water, but no, let's add this on top of it. As you can see, it's not supposed to be added on, but it's supposed to be kind of refocused and seeing how we're using the water, and then add on to that in whatever development occurs. Existing use and authorized plan use added together is currently about 20 MGD. That's back to this slide. That's the authorized plan use. And then the initial data that we've been collecting, primarily meter data for different use classifications. And we're focusing on residential and agricultural use, even though the Department of Water basically always provides potable water, right? They don't provide non-potable water. But as far as how the meters are classified, there's a way to track how agricultural lots are using water. And what we're finding is that they typically are falling within normal planning number ranges. Example, for residential lots for this Kona area, the single family, even though they're adding up some of the bigger parcels, come out to about 430, oh, got my people back there, they can correct me if I'm wrong, but 430 gallons per unit per day. And then we use the census of 2.67 people per unit, and that breaks down to about 160 gallons per capita per day for residential, the residential users. So that's kind of is a little bit higher on the higher side, because it's a dry area. Plus, you probably got some irrigation in there too, but it's still within normal ranges. The agricultural use, we found one good model parcel, which is the State Agricultural Park. If you're coming out of the airport, on the Mauka side, there's an agricultural park over there put in by the state. That's one of the biggest users with that, along with Nelha. They use a lot of water, but it uses about 260,000 gallons per day, 250,000 gallons plus. And that parcel is 195 acres, and it so that breaks down to about 1,400 gallons per acre per day. Okay, when we did the LUPAG exercise, what we used was for agricultural areas, and although that one may not have included agriculture, but we used something like 3,400 gallons per acre per day. Okay, and that's from the Department of Ag. So, you know, the numbers are falling in so far within reason, and that's what we trying to kind of expand, you know. Like I said, obviously, I don't think the county wanted us to do this for the whole island in this level of detail, because is very time consuming. But for this sensitive area, that's what we've committed to do.